agriculture, and specifically conversation with some experts in the field around logistics, around the nuts and bolts of actually getting your farm certified. Last week, we had a great conversation around sort of big picture context of organic. And now we're kind of coming down a little bit, and this is a workshop for you if you're interested in exploring getting your farm certified. If you, sort of what those steps are, and sort of demystifying the process a little bit. And we've got a great group of presenters here that will be presenting, but we also have time set aside for Q&A as well. So before I introduce our presenters, I'd just like to say that this on this Zoom call, we offer this workshop as we do with the majority of our programming here at Viva Farms. We have simultaneous interpretation into Spanish. So if you'd like to listen on the Spanish channel, you can do so by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and selecting Spanish. And I'll just say that real quick. Si quiere escuchar al taller en español, por favor puede elegir interpretación al fondo de tu pantalla y puede elegir Spanish como el idioma. Y tenemos interpretación ofrecido hoy por WSU, la Universidad Estatal de Washington, Skagit County. Entonces, muchas gracias. And I'll just say that we have interpretation tonight offered by WSU Skagit County. So thank you so much for your partnership and helping us increase accessibility for our programming. Also, just wanted to, while tonight, we have some presentations to get through, and to kind of look at the process around organic certification. We do want to make sure that if you have any questions, that we're not losing those. So please feel free to use the chat function in Zoom. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar. But there's at the bottom, you can hit the chat button and you can type in a question. There's also a feature where you can raise your hand if you feel like there's something really urgent or something. But I would encourage you to capture questions in the chat, and we have someone who's monitoring the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to those at the right time. I would also just say too, if you feel inspired to do so, you can change your name if you want. You can put your farm name, whatever it is. You can do that too if that's something you'd like to put out there. And then the last thing I'll mention before we get started is that this workshop is funded through the USDA Transition to Organic Partnerships program. We're very thankful for their support, and our presenters tonight are able to be here through those means. So thank you to the TOP program. Thank you to Oregon Tilth, who is administering that in our region. With that being said, I think we'll go ahead and get started. But before we do, I'll just introduce tonight. We're joined by Brenda Book from the WSDA Organic Program. We're joined by Sarah Townsend from Oregon Tilth, and also from Franklin Smith from Oregon Tilth as well, in addition to a number of Viva Farms staff. Just feel free to use the chat if you need to reach out to anyone directly. But I think that being said, I'll hand it over to Brenda.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for being here and for your interest in organic certification. I am just so pleased to be able to collaborate with Viva Farms, but with also my colleagues at Oregon Tilth. We don't get to do that very often, so it's a lot of fun to do certifiers to partner up like that. So if you guys want to pull up the slides for me. maybe while that's getting all set up, just a quick introduction to myself. I'm the program manager here at WSDA's organic program. I've been with WSDA for almost 23 years now, all focused in organic certification. So I could talk about organic certification for a long time, much longer than we have time today. So please, just know that we're a resource for you, and we're happy to follow up if there's something that I get into, but not in enough depth, and you wanna ask more questions later. WSDA Organic Program, we certify about 1,100 operations. We are focused here in Washington State. That's where we operate. That's who we serve. And we're here not only for those businesses that seek certification with us, but we're also here for the public, for consumers, for anybody with questions on what organic means, and how do you read that label, what's behind that label. So again, consider us a resource, not just for certification service, but just for organic questions in general. All right, are we ready? Slides good to go?
Maybe check real quick. How does it look to you? Can the folks viewing, what do you see?
I can see both of them. The Spanish one is a little bit larger than the other one. The English version is cut off a little bit on the right-hand side, in my view. It looks pretty good now for this slide. There's still a little bit more space on the Spanish one, so I don't know if future slides it might cut off something on the right hand, but it's pretty good. All right, great.
Hold on one sec, Brett. Sorry to interrupt, but it looks like it's, they're kind of like, they're not side by side. They're like overlapping a little bit. Anna, I wonder if maybe you could
Yep, I'll jump in.
Share your screen. Thanks.
Yep.
Well, they're getting set up. I can certainly just start talking here. So we use the best use of our time. Oh, that's
Perfect.
much better. Yeah.
Thank you.
So as Rob mentioned, this workshop today is sponsored by the Transition to Organic Partnership Program, also known as TOP. TOP is a really exciting initiative started by USDA, really focused on helping farmers transition to organic, provide new resources, educational material, and really get out there to create some new new efforts that we can engage with operations that are interested in transitioning to organic. As you can see on this map, this initiative is divided up into 6 different regions across the country. So obviously we are a part of the Northwest region. Each region has a lead, and that lead is it's required by USDA to be the largest nonprofit organization that's connected to a certification agency. So Oregon Tilth meets that criteria. They are our lead here in the Northwest and kind of overseeing these efforts. But WSDA is a core partner with Oregon Tilth on this effort. And so we've got a lot of exciting things happening just here in Washington State that we're not going to get into today, but again, there's a lot of opportunities. This is a 5-year program, and so there are funds coming into the Northwest over the course of 5 years to really support organic producers. You can go to the next slide. So TOP is designed to have these different buckets. And so all of the different projects that we work on and all the different resources and initiatives all fall into one of these buckets. Mentorship, community building, technical assistance, and workforce development. What we're doing today falls into that technical assistance, helping businesses understand the certification process, be ready for that, and get all their questions answered. But again, there's a lot of other projects going on. At the end, we'll talk about a few resources. One of those is the Northwest Top website, which lists out a bunch of different projects that are happening currently and will keep on getting populated over the next few years with more of that work that's being done. So again, thank you to Northwest Top. Thank you to USDA for making all of this possible. Next slide. Just really quick, I want to highlight, who WSDA is and who Oregon Tilth is, or OTCO. We are two organizations that really come from.
Ist das die Pampe? Lemon?
We come from. Sorry, it sounds like we got a little bit of background noise going on. All right. We were born out of the same movement. Back 40 years ago, Northwest farmers got together and identified a need for certification program, a need to be able to explain what that label meant and to make sure that everybody's operating under those same standards and same requirements. We, over the course of time, we kind of split off of where in Washington, farmers went to legislators and identified that
Immer wenn ich die Augen so
state
kurz vorm
government,
Einigen bin, passieren hier Dinge. Es passiert.
one of the state government to take over that service and enforcement. And in Oregon, Oregon Tilth, a nonprofit, took the lead in that effort. WSDA, because of that long history, we're now the oldest and largest state-run certification agency in the country. We only provide services to Washington businesses. We also operate an input material review service where we evaluate formulated inputs in compliance that are in compliance with that federal standard and publish a list that's used by certified operations regardless of what certifier they're working with. And like I said before, we're also a resource center for Washington businesses and consumers. Oregon Tilth is a nonprofit organization, and they provide certification services nationally and internationally. They're one of the largest organic certification agencies in the US now, and a true leader in organic advocacy and education. But we both do the same thing. We both can go to the next slide here. We are both accredited by USDA to enforce the national organic standards, this federal regulation. So in 2002, organic standards became under the oversight of USDA, became a federal requirement. Prior to that, Washington State had their own definition. We had different states with definitions, different certifiers with definitions. I think you guys got into a little bit of that in last week's workshop. But USDA essentially brought us all together under one standard. And the requirement now is that to make an organic claim in the US, farmers and businesses handling organic products must be certified. USDA oversees the standards and they oversee us as certification agencies. They don't provide certification directly. So both, again, WSDA and Oregon Tilth were accredited by USDA to provide those services and enforce the federal regulation. We operate under the same set of standards. All right, next slide. I want to just highlight for a moment the value of getting certified organic. It is a marketing program. It's there that if you want to market your products with an organic claim, that certification provides that pathway to do so. It's a way that we can set products apart and communicate your defined production standards to consumers, especially important when you're not talking to your customers directly. You don't have the opportunity maybe to explain what you're doing on the farm or invite those consumers onto your farm. And it's a way that you can put a label there and that consumer at the grocery store is going to have an understanding of how you produce that product. It's also a way for you to be counted. Certification unites farmers across regions, across crops, and provides opportunities to be involved in policy decisions. Operations that are certified by USDA, that data is utilized to see, what's the trend, how many farms do we have that are being certified, what kind of policies do we need to put in place to support those farms. If you're not certified, but you're still using organic practices, nobody knows that you are. And so this is a way to be counted. It also opens the door to getting support. There's certain financial assistance at the federal level, specifically, and then at the state level in different ways as well. That's only open to a business that goes through that certification process. So it can open the door to some opportunities that might not be available to you otherwise. All right, next slide. So again, WSDA and Oregon Tilth, we are both accredited certification agencies. Anybody that's interested in getting certified, you have an option to choose which certifier is going to best fit your needs. Again, we're offering the same sort of service. Our process and our decision should be consistent with each other, but we might go about things in a little different way. We might have a different fee structure. There may be some advantages for one certification agency compared to another because we're closer, and in turn that may make the process a little bit cheaper. There's also market recognition. If you're selling your products into a certain market or to certain customers, they may recognize one label or one certification agency over another. There's also, just customer service. As a state agency, we can provide certain things. As a nonprofit, Oregon Tilth can provide certain things. And so it's an individual decision that businesses need to take a look at of what's going to be the best fit for them. And WSDA and Oregon Tilth, we're not the only options either. USDA has a certifier locator where you can see all the different certification agencies that operate in Washington State. There's about 17, I think, right now. And we'll get to, again, in the end, we have some resources and you can access that certifier locator link through that. Okay, next slide. So what I'm going to focus on for the next little bit are the 5 steps to certification, kind of breaking down that process into 5 simple steps. And some of these steps are pretty big and pretty expansive. It's not just one thing you have to do, but it really does break down into 5 steps. And those steps are, first adopting organic practices and then applying for certification, which is the hugest. The adopting organic practices is not just something that you decide to do and the next day you implement it. There's a lot that goes into that. The applying for certification, on the other hand, is something that you can do with a pretty simple process, but you first have to make sure that you're ready. And so we're going to talk about how you can do that. The next step, once you've adopted organic practices, you've taken that big leap, you've applied for certification, your application is going to get reviewed by the certifier. We're going to look at what you have on paper. Does that comply with the regulation? All the information that you provide about what those practices are that you're implementing, do those meet that federal standard? Once your certifier has determined you've got a complete application, all the information that you've provided does meet the organic requirements, then it's time for us to send out an inspector to actually see if what you put in your application matches what we see on your farm. The inspector is going to put together a report, and then they're going to send that report back into that certification agency who's going to do a review. And again, look at is what is provided in that inspection report compliant with those federal standards. And then finally, a certification decision is made. And this cycle repeats on an annual basis. It's not just a one-time and then you're done. It requires a renewal. It requires an inspection each year. So we'll go to the next slide and kind of break down these steps a little bit more. So again, prior to applying, you got to make the decision to start adopting organic practices and using inputs that comply with the organic standards. Again, resources are available to help you, and we'll direct you to some of those resources here at the end. Next slide. So before we get into details about adopting organic practices, I think it's really important that we are all grounded with what does organic mean? How does the USDA organic regulation define the term organic? And I'm really proud of this definition. This definition is a very holistic approach, and it allows us to apply these standards to a variety of different cropping systems all over the world, not just in Washington, not just in the US. In Washington state, we have 300 different crops that are grown commercially. And we can apply this one standard because of the way that it's written to all of those different production systems. And so organic is a production system managed in accordance with the regulation to respond to site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster the cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. You see that organic, the definition is not that you just use organic compliant inputs. The word input isn't even included in the definition. There is an allowance to use organic compliant inputs, but first you have to go through and make sure that you have practices in place that use cultural, biological, and mechanical means to produce that crop first. Inputs are a last resort in organic, even compliant inputs. And so again, these because of the way it's written, we can apply it to a lot of different cropping systems. Okay, next slide. So this is the organic standards in a nutshell. The organic regulation is about 100 pages. It's probably more now because of some changes that recently went into effect, but it's hefty. There's a lot of detail in there. We're looking at a lot of different aspects of that farm and that production system. But in a nutshell, this is what it kind of breaks down to for a farm. You're required to source organic seeds and planting stock when available. So the priority is using organic first, but then there are some allowances if you can't find a certain seed or planting stock in an organic form. You're required to improve or enhance soil quality through crop rotation and fertility management. You're required to promote biodiversity and natural resource conservation. And you're required to prevent pests, weeds, and disease by using physical or mechanical methods before applying approved inputs. Again, really important. Organic is not an input substitution way of producing a crop. It's much more than that. And then finally, organic farms are required to minimize the impact to wildlife and the environment. And then want to just note that organic farms must not use GMOs, sewage sludge, or radiation. These are known as the big three. These are the absolute not allowed in any sort of fashion, overarching part of the standard. Okay, next slide. So when you're adopting organic practices, it's important to understand what's the timeline here that you're looking at. Organic certification requires 36 months of organic management. And so it's not something that you just decide to do and the next day you can apply for certification. You need to be able to demonstrate that you're transitioning to organic management. And so that really depends on maintaining really good records on what is the date that you applied, the last time you applied a prohibited input to that land, or maybe you didn't apply it. What's the last date that that land had a prohibited input applied? And that's going to start our clock. That's going to start the transition. 12 months then after that application, and then 24 months after that application, an operation could qualify for transitional certification. Both WSDA and Oregon Tilth offer some transitional certification. We're not going to get into that specifically today, but just know there are some options in between that last prohibited material date and the 36 months when the land is going to qualify for organic certification. We encourage you to, apply early, so that you can make sure that everything's all in a row, ducks in a row by the time that you reach that 36 months. But again, it's really important to understand you need to be able to switch to organic compliant production for 36 months before you can actually even use that term organic. And you need to have records to be able to show that. Your land may have not had a prohibited material applied, but if you don't have any way for us to verify that, then our clock starts at the point where we can start tracking and verifying what's gone on to that land. Okay, next slide. So we're still on step one. You're still adopting organic, you've adopted organic practices, you've started tracking, what that transition is. And then you're getting ready now to apply. Again, at the end, we'll talk about some resources that will help you in that process of adopting organic practices. But we're there now. And so you're ready to apply for certification because you want to harvest a crop and use an organic claim on that. So it's important to understand that the person or business managing the land or crop, that's the entity that has to apply for certification. It may not be the landowner. You can apply for certification on land that you are leasing. It's the manager of the land that we're evaluating, not the landowner. We're going out and evaluating the person that is applying organic inputs and managing that crop. We also want to encourage everybody to apply for certification at least 3.5 months prior to the harvest of a crop you want to market as organic. Again, you can start, there's some opportunities to apply for certification under a transitional status 12 months after the application of prohibited material or 24 months, but you still can't use an organic claim. And so if you're going to wait all the way until the year, that third year, when you do comply with that transition period, get your application in early, because what we don't want to have happen is that you're ready to harvest a crop as organic, but the certification agency isn't able to get out there in time because they didn't get enough notice for that. So apply early in the process. All right, next slide. I want to touch on application forms and fees. I noted at the beginning that different certification agencies, we'll all get to the same end, but we may have different ways of getting there. So we all have our own application packets and forms, and ways that you can submit that, hard copy, electronically. And those application forms they all do meet the organic requirements. USDA evaluates all of our forms to make sure that we are asking the right questions and drilling down in the right way. But again, we may do that a little bit differently here in Washington State at WSDA, because we're focused on Washington State. We can ask questions that are really specific to the types of systems we see here, the types of crops we see here, the issues that we have around our different microclimates that we have. And so again, a certifier, you have a choice in certifiers, and you have to look at, well, what certifier is going to work the best for me? And the application forms may be part of that evaluation process that you look at. There's also differences in fees. I'm putting down here an average cost of certification for a small farm during their first year is likely going to be around $1,000. And then, as I mentioned, this is an ongoing process. And so there are renewal fees. You know, Oregon Tilth is a nonprofit. WSDA, we operate as a nonprofit under the state system. We don't receive any tax dollars for the services that we provide. And so we have to recoup our costs in full through certification fees. Renewal fees, I know for both Oregon Tilth and WSDA, and which is true of quite a few certifiers. It's typically based then on the income received from organic crops or products. So we're assessing what your next year's fee is going to be based on what you produced the year before. That way, it's a bit of a risk assessment. And the more product that you're putting out there, the more work that's involved in certifying that product. And so it's a higher fee. There are cost share programs available to assist you with certification costs. USDA National Organic Program works with a cost share program on national side of things that's administered here in Washington State by WSDA. It's separate from our certification program. We provide cost share not just to operations that are certified by WSDA, but to anybody in Washington State. You have to go, you apply for cost share through the state that you live in, not through your certifier. The cost share program funds for 2024 haven't been released yet. WSDA, we usually see those funds become available to us in the summer. And then we start issuing cost share vouchers throughout the fall and into the winter. The cost share program does work where you pay your fees first, and then it's a reimbursement. It's not a credit program. I will mention though, here in Washington State, we've been working hard, both the department as well as with our partners at Tilth Alliance and Cora to see if we can get a cost share program that's specific to Washington State. So hopefully by 2025 or 2026, we'll be able to offer not just federal cost share, but state cost share as well. Okay, next slide. So the biggest form that you have to fill out, regardless of certification agency, is the organic system plan. The organic system plan is outlined in the federal requirements. It's something that every certified farm and business has to complete. And it truly is a plan. It's outlining what practices are you going to use to protect the integrity of the organic product and your organic land. It's essentially a contract or an agreement between you and your certification agency. You're putting down on paper, you're being really intentional that this is how I'm going to do things. And then we go out and we evaluate that you're following that plan. But as you guys all know, plans can change. And that's the beauty of the organic system plan. It's not stagnant, it's dynamic. You can change your plan, you can update it. But again, it all goes through your certifier for review to make sure that any updates or changes you make do meet those organic requirements. Okay, next slide. So this is just a list of what is in the federal regulation regarding all organic system plans. The must, your plan must include a description of all these things. But certifiers, we help you through this process. We developed organic system plan forms. They're going to ask you all of these questions. So it's not that we're looking for a big long narrative. We're looking, we give you those prompts. We ask you those questions. And then you are providing us with that detail through that form. Okay, next slide. Okay, you've adopted organic practices. You've waited that 36 months. You've applied for certification. Now your application is in the hands of a certification agency. As I mentioned before, we're going to evaluate that based on what you put down on paper and with the organic requirements. we're essentially looking, what are the risks on your farm to organic integrity? And then how do you respond to those risks? How do you prevent contamination? How do you prevent commingling of non-organic crops if you're producing both, which we often see. We often see farms come on board initially with maybe one crop, one field. You're testing it. That's completely allowed. It's okay to do parallel production of both non-organic and organic. But when you do so, that's a higher risk of contamination. And so we're going to expect to see some really detailed practices of how you're going to prevent any issues with the organic crop. And through this process, this is the point where we're providing you with a lot of technical assistance. We're going to let you know. You don't have to, we're not going to keep you guessing. We're going to let you know if your plan is missing information or if it doesn't meet the requirements. We're going to give you an opportunity to make changes and adjust your system. Because again, a plan is just a plan. It can change. Okay, next slide. So we've reviewed that plan. We've sent you a letter talking about it. We've provided you with some technical assistance. We've maybe asked for some additional information or let you know that you're going to have some information available at your on-site inspection. My colleagues at Oregon Tilth are going to get into the on-site inspection in a little bit more detail. I'm just going to cover a few kind of highlights of that. But an inspection is scheduled after that. We've determined your plan is compliant. And we're going to schedule that inspection at a time when we can observe your production practices. And so if you apply in the middle of the winter, we're not going to come out there the next week. We're going to come out there at a time when we can actually see production starting to happen. And again, since this is an annual process, we're going to mix up those times when we come see your operation from year to year. It doesn't help anybody out if we always come in the spring and we never see your practices. We never evaluate your organic system plan for all those practices that happen prior to harvest or at harvest. So we're going to mix it up, but always we're going to be coming at a time when production practices can be observed. Okay, next slide. At the inspection, the inspector is doing three really important things. They're comparing those practices and the inputs to your application forms. They're going to look at what's actually happening compared to what you put in your plan. They're going to collect information through interviews. That's interviews of the land manager, the farm manager, as well as your employees. We're going to talk to folks and see if, again, the procedures and practices you outlined, they're actually being implemented. Our inspectors are also going to make observations. What can they see happening? Do they see any evidence of prohibited materials or practices that are out of compliance? They're going to look at records. They're going to look at the information, how you're tracking your organic crop, how you're tracking the inputs that you are applying, and they may even conduct sampling. Inspectors are also going to audit records. And so, they're looking at all those records, but they're going to sit down and specifically audit them. They're going to use those records to confirm that the source of your organic crops and verify that you have the production capacity for the amount of organic crops you either plan to distribute or that you have distributed. But I think one of the most important things the inspector does is provide technical assistance. Again, this is not like a pass-fail sort of a thing. A tagline for organic certification is continuous improvement. There's not just one model organic farm that we're all striving to get to. It looks different for different production systems, for different sites. And we're going to be there to help provide that technical assistance and help you understand what those requirements are so that you can make the best decisions for your farm. We're not going to tell you how to farm. You don't want us to tell you how to farm. That would just, that's not what we do. But we're going to tell you and talk to you about how you're farming and then how it connects to the organic regulation. Okay, next slide. Really quick, I just wanted to highlight those audits because the federal regulation requires certifiers to do 2 very specific types of audit at every inspection. There's a traceback audit where an inspector is going to start with a sales invoice or a final product, and they're going to follow it back through your system. They're going to follow it back to see, can I get all the way back to the field where this is harvested from? Your record's going to make it clear how this product that you're selling with an organic claim, where it came from on your farm. We're also going to be assessing if you had, again, the capacity to produce the amount of crop that you distributed. So we're doing a mass balance audit in that case. Next slide. And to do both of those audits, we're going to follow what is called in the regulation, the organic audit trail. And so, again, John's going to talk a little bit more about record keeping and just the requirements of what's being looked at that inspection. But a good way to think about it is putting your activities in all of these different buckets here and be able to trace it through. And so if we start, you're planting seeds, you're using planting stock, you're putting it in a field, and then you're maintaining records about all of those field activities that go into producing and managing that crop that you've planted. You're maintaining records about your inputs. You're maintaining records about your harvest, about packing, storage, delivery, and sales. And you can see if we go back through this, that's the traceback audit. You can go to the next slide. And so, we want to be able to trace your organic products through your system. And the way that you do that is documenting all of your activities. And a good just rule to think of is that if you're doing something with an organic product, with an organic crop, organic field, you need to be documenting that in some way. Another rule is that you want to be able to track your crops one step forward and one step back. So at a particular activity, can you go from that harvest activity back to the field activities that happen, back to when you planted that crop, and can you go forward to the delivery? And so you have the ability to test your system and see if you have a compliant audit trail in place before the inspector even gets there. Another important thing to do is that the rule requires is to identify your crops and products as organic within your record keeping system and on your audit trail. Especially important when we're talking about a farm that's producing both organic and non-organic. And then the final little tip for developing that compliant audit trail is making sure you're including unique identifiers. So how are you able to go from one record to the next? Do you have a lot number that's been identified? And so that we can see this harvest of an organic crop and this lot number that goes back to and can connect back through your system. Those links can change throughout the audit trail. You may switch to something else as long as that is, again, really transparent. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we went really fast over, this inspector is going to do an audit. They're going to look at records. They're going to make observations and evaluate your system. And I mentioned they may take pesticide residue samples as well. It's not required on every operation for us to collect samples. We use this as a tool. USDA organic regulation requires us to take samples at least 5% of the operations that we certify. Here at WSDA, and I'm sure Oregon Tilth is very similar, we usually exceed that 5%. We've gone up to as high as over 20% of our operations get sampled in a year. It's an excellent tool. It's a way for us to, when there's a high risk area, to make sure that our observations and our records are accurate. That test can give us information that we may not be able to see in a record. But testing is, there's times a year when testing is just not the right tool to use, and that's why it's not required at every operation and every inspection. If something does come up with pesticide residues, then there is a certain threshold where that crop still can be sold with an organic claim. And that threshold's pretty small. It's if residues are detected at a level greater than 5% of the federal tolerance for a non-organic crop. So we're looking at just a small tolerance level there. And we allow that because organic farms don't live in a bubble. And you may have neighbors that are applying prohibited materials, and they may drift onto your crop. And so when we get levels that are so small, then it usually is we're not having a direct application. It's potentially that we've got some buffers that are not sufficient. And again, we'll go back to that continuous improvement. So we're going to require the operation, even if you get positive residues at any level, to put corrective actions in place, to expand your buffers, to work with your neighbors to ensure that there isn't drift. But again, just want to make the point that there is a very small tolerance level so that we can, again, continuous improvement. Okay, next slide. Okay, we're at step 4. The inspector was out there, they made those observations, they interviewed, they audited those records, they provided technical assistance to help you understand what those requirements are, and then they're submitting a report. That report's going to go back to specifically to a role of the reviewer. The reviewer is the counterpart to the inspector, and the reviewer is the one that's going to evaluate that inspection report for compliance with the regulation. The inspector does not make a certification decision. They are not the one that's going to determine if you get organically certified or not. They're providing data and information on what they found at that on-site inspection. But then we've got a third party and another entity that is going to make that decision. Again, there's going to be that back and forth. And so you're going to have it's not a pass fail. You're going to have an opportunity to respond to areas that we identify do not fully meet the requirements. And if you can make corrective action in those areas, then we can keep on moving forward with the certification process. There's very few things. There's really only one thing that's going to just stop the process, and that's the application of a prohibited material, because suddenly you don't meet that 36 months anymore. And so we're starting all over again. Okay, next slide. And finally, we're at that 5th step where certification can happen. Once all those issues of concerns or a non-compliance that we've identified has been resolved, we're able to issue an organic certificate. And next slide. We'll go into a little bit more here. Once you are certified, that organic certification remains in effect and doesn't expire. But to remain in compliance with the regulation, you have to renew your certification annually. And again, it goes back to each certifier might do this a little bit differently. At WSDA, all of our operations are required to renew by March 1st each year. I believe my colleagues can correct me at Oregon Tilth, it's like on a rolling basis. So it depends on when you first applied, will help determine when your renewal date is. But you have to renew. And if you don't renew, then we start going down that track of a non-compliance, and you could lose your certification in that way. When you renew, you're going to review that system plan, make sure that it's still accurate, or you're going to provide us with updates. You're going to let us know, I need to change some things. I got a new crop I'm going to try. You know, I'm putting different practices in place because they just weren't working well for my system. And we're going to do that review, and all over again, we're going to come out and do that on-site inspection, evaluate if those updates that you made are actually being implemented and they're in full compliance. And just it keeps on going. But through that process, again, your certification doesn't expire. That way you can keep on marketing your organic product and crop while in the background, we're working with you on that certification process. Okay, next slide. And that brings us to a pause. We want to put out, you know, do you have any questions so far that I can answer on what I've shared with you up to this point?
Thank you, Brenda. And I've got a couple I've collected from the chat and maybe from last week as well. Just wanted to get back to Noah's question, saying that they know some farms have moved to new land and gotten documentation from prior owners that the land was fallow or that no prohibited inputs were used. And can you speak to a little to those of us who are already using organic practices but are moving to new land? What do they need from the previous owners or managers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so again, it comes back to, can you document and verify that there's been 36 months of no prohibited materials on that land? And so if you're moving onto a piece of land and that landowner didn't have good documentation, that's going to be a little bit problematic, because it's going to be hard for us to evaluate, are you compliant with the regulations? When we've got situations where the land was fallow or nothing's been happening, we're going to take that into consideration. So if you're moving onto a piece of land and it's really clear this land has been cultivating crops, and then we're going to expect to see, okay, well, what inputs have gone onto that land? If you're moving onto land that's been fallow, I think, you know, WSDA has a form. I'm sure Oregon Tilth has a very similar form of we can collect information from that previous landowner to verify that it has been fallow for those 36 months. We might, you know, there's not just one, like, here's this list of, you must have these 5 things. This is where it comes back to site specific. We're going to look at what's reasonable for that operation, for the type of production. We're going to use the tools that we have available to us. We may be looking at you know, mapping from the past to verify that claim that nope, nothing's been happening on this, and see if that matches up to, again, the resources that we have. We're going to do interviews. We're going to use all those same tools that we have, and again, we can use sampling if we need to. And so you need to you know, gather up as much information as you can, tap into those forms that we provide where we outline the type of information that we would need to have available. And then your certifier is going to look, is this reasonable? And so it's possible for sure to come in to certification right away with that evidence that it's just been fallow for the last 36 months.
Thank you. I think one more, I think I can combine a few around leased land. So are there special considerations if someone is leasing land or a small portion of a larger farm? And then sort of on the flip side of that, if a small lease plot, if there are conservation practices happening on the whole system, should they be explaining that in their OSP if they're leasing a small part in that bigger farm?
Great questions. Yeah, so again, we're evaluating the manager. And so it's it's okay to submit an organic application for a piece of leased land. Our forms are going to help you walk through that process and walk through the type of information that we need in those situations. But yeah, that's completely fine. We're going to define your organic field, your site, based on what you're managing. When it comes to those conservation practices, natural resource, biodiversity, conservation, the regulation requires that activities that impact that site are legitimate activities to outline, and they do lend towards your ability to comply with that part of the standard. And so if those conservation practices on that larger farm are impacting and do provide benefit to the site that you're farming, then absolutely you want to include those. But again, this is, I think, where our forms are going to lead you through those questions. We're going to ask you, what is happening on a whole, not just on, and for that particular part of the standard, it's not just on that those field boundaries, but looking at, well, what's happening that is supporting that effort and benefiting on that site.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think now we might I think we'll turn it over to Sarah Townsend from Oregon Tilth.
Good afternoon, everyone. You can call me John if you like. I'm filling in for John Caputo, but I am Sarah Townsend. I am a certification officer with Oregon Tilth. I've been here with Tilth for about 5.5 years, but I started out as an organic producer. So I've been through getting certified myself. Then I became an inspector, and I did that for over a decade, and then worked as a certification officer for a couple different certifiers as well. And I'm happily at my home at Oregon Tilth now. Those are my bona fides. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the inspection process. We have slides for this. I think it starts on slide 28, maybe. Perfect. So Brenda pretty much went over all this in a very general overview way, and even delved more deeply than I expected. So I will just kind of cruise through this, and if questions come up, folks, put them in the chat, and I also have some links that I might pop into the chat as we go. So you've submitted your organic system plan, which in the first year of certification is affectionately known as the application for certification, but it is the same exact thing, the organic system plan. It is that dynamic living document. It's kind of the backbone of certification. You submit that, the initial review of documents occurs. There is a back and forth between your certifier to clarify things or get more information. And then your system plan becomes determined, able to comply, and an inspector comes out to your location or locations. To get an inspector to come out, first, the inspector needs to directly contact that client or that applicant. So you will be contacted directly by the inspector themselves to set up a mutually suitable appointment or appointments. Sometimes it takes more than one day or more than one visit, depending on your situation. You agree to the date and time, you make the appointment, and then the inspector comes that day. The inspection consists of the in-office portion, which in that second box there is the review of records, conducting audit trail exercises, which Brenda did start a really good explanation of. The other part is to tour the farm and facilities, which means observing all the fields and structures and all your boundaries and buffer zones as well. So there was a question about, what do certifiers think when there's something that's out of the operator's control, the farmer's control? Well, you need to show that you are doing everything you can to have as much control as possible, whether that's setting up a buffer zone or changing your systems or communicating with your neighbors or what have you. Those buffer zones can be really crucial depending on, again, site specific. And the scheduling of whether we do, the inspector does that in-office portion first or the tour of the fields and things, kind of depends on the weather and the conditions that day and what's convenient for you and the inspector. So again, it's an ongoing communication to set it up best as best for each person involved. Again, after the inspection, the inspector provides a report to the certification agency. That inspector does not make decisions. They are required, the inspector is required to provide resources, technical resources, and ways to find what you need, but can't give you any specific methods or techniques or information to overcome specific barriers to certification. They cannot be your consultant, for example. You know, an inspector is the eyes and ears and the nose of the organic consumer and the observer and information collector. They verify whether the operations practices match that approved organic system plan, and they're a reporter. They're tasked to provide that accurate and objective account of whether the observed practices appear to comply with organic standards. They also can collect updates. If you've made changes since the time you submitted your plan that need to be collected and communicated to your certifier, they will collect those updates as well. An inspector is not a consultant, they're not an advisor, they're not a decision maker, and they are not the certifier, even if they are staff employees of a certifier. They will not be involved in that decision-making process. So moving on to the next slide, please. So the process of the inspection, if you want, you can refer to the section of the rule that talks directly about on-site inspections. I'll drop it in the chat here. It's 403, and the way most inspectors do it, and again, this is every certifier is slightly different. Every inspector is a unique human being, and every applicant for certification may need things to be in a slightly different order. But generally speaking, there's an opening meeting, especially that first year. The inspector will take the time to discuss the process for the day, how the audit of your documents and records will be conducted, go over any questions that you have about the process, and then get into the questions in that inspection report. So every certifier has usually a checklist or specific questions that need to be answered. And often in that initial review of documents, specific things will have come up that the certifier has directed, special instructions or particular requests for the inspector to verify. Then the audit happens. The audit consists of three basic things. As Brenda said, your sales for the organic year, the mass balance, and the trace back audits, which we'll get into a little bit more in detail shortly. And the tour of the fields or greenhouses, your hoop houses, if you have enclosed mushroom or sprouting houses, and any on-site handling, storage, transport containers, things like that, and even sections of your operation that are not going to be included in certification. That's one of the things you agree to when you apply for certification, is for your inspector and your certifier to have access to all the portions of your operation, including uncertified areas. And then at the end of it all, the inspector sometimes will take 10 or 15 minutes to gather their thoughts and organize, and then they will conduct a closing meeting or an exit interview about their observations to verify that you agree that those things are accurate, and then also to kind of give you a little heads up and advance warning of any potential concerns or non-compliances observed or points that may need improvement. And they will almost always have you sign off or acknowledge that exit interview, which is a really good, protects everybody involved. So the annual sales is your yearly gross organic production. It's kind of tied to the exemption for small farms. So it's a gross of $5,000 is the limit where you need to be certified after you start earning $5,000 or more a year. And so not every certifier uses annual sales as a fee schedule point, but they will always be checking. It's part of kind of the mass balance of, do you have the capacity to produce enough organic product to match the sales that you're claiming? That mass balance is a targeted exam of the product in versus the product produced or the product out and sold. It balances your production, and the product out should never exceed product in or product produced. And the trace back, again, it's traceability, usually done by selecting a sales invoice or a finished product and tracing it backwards all the way through the production steps, from sale back through storage and harvest, cultivation activities, to the ordering of your seeds or your fertilizer even. So when you're starting to keep records, you want to think about kind of keeping everything, and you'll learn over time what the inspectors really need. So next slide, please. This is the section of the regulation that is dedicated to record keeping. That on-site audit, that inspector does a deep dive. This is what they're trying to see that you are complying with. So the first thing says that the operation must maintain records concerning production, harvesting, and handling of agricultural products that are or intended to be represented as organic. And the reason it has 100% organic and made with organic is because those are the 3 labeling categories in the United States. But generally speaking, any kind of organic claim, your records need to cover that. And if you want to visit that part of the rule, here's the link there. For some reason, it's not coming up as a clickable link, but you can copy and paste it if you want to. Next slide, please. The next section is more specific about what the records must do. Again, it's another must. If you read through the regulation, there are must nots, which are prohibitions, and there are mays. So the records have to be adapted to your business. It must be appropriate for your operation, and they must fully disclose all activities and transactions in sufficient detail so the auditor can understand them. And those records need to span that time of purchase or acquisition, as we said, like an ordering of your seed, all the way through production to sale or transport, and have to trace back to the last certified operation. That last sentence has a lot to do with folks who are buying ingredients. So if you're buying a certified ingredient for your value-added product to mix into the crop you're growing, you want to make sure to keep those records as well. Records can be kept in any form. We're not picky about that. We don't prescribe what you're required to do. We just need to be able to audit it. So for example, computer programs or spreadsheets, phone apps, you can write it on a calendar in your pocket notebook. You can use paper or a ledger. You just want to keep that purchased inputs and feed records that allow for those exercises when they're audited to be conducted. When you're thinking about what needs to be recorded, keep in mind that if it isn't written down, it can't be verified by that inspector or that auditor. And you want to refer to 403, section 403 of the rule for what the inspector is required to verify. Next slide, please. This is the second half of what the records must do. Audit trail documentation for ag products that are handled or produced by the operation. This is pretty specific to handling and production. So it goes from the production side to the handling side. And then you have to keep those records for not less than 5 years from the date they're created. You can, again, paper, electronic, like you can scan your records and keep them in the cloud as long as they're accessible to the auditor at the time of inspection, you should be fine. Next slide. The final part of 103B is that those records have to be sufficient to demonstrate compliance. That you learn what that is over time, especially after that first audit. You'll have your inspector will show you what links in that chain of custody are missing and report that to your certifier, and the certifier will help you figure out what kind of documents need to be kept in order for your chain of custody to be complete. And that 103C just specifies that you, the certified farmer, must make those records available for inspection during normal business hours by either representatives of the secretary, which is that USDA secretary, the state programs governing state official, which is only in California, or your certifying agent, which is the commonest. That representative of the certifying agent is the inspector, almost 90, probably 95% of the time. Next slide, please. So there are other resources for what records are required. NOP provided clarification in their instruction number 2602. I think I have a link here for that. Hopefully this one will be clickable. Nope, doesn't look like it is, but oh yeah, it worked. Took everything there, yeah. That's great because it's broken down by scope. So for crop producers, they can just check the section of it that talks about what records are necessary for crop producers. And same for livestock producers and handlers. There are sample forms available as well that the USDA and ATRA provided. Those can be downloaded and you can either use them as is, or you can modify them to fit your operation. Here's some more links for those. But generally speaking, we're just looking for your activities need to be traceable through your records. And again, it needs to fit your operation. And we don't tell you what to do. As long as we can track those and understand them, you should be good. And that's kind of explained in the next slide, please. Activity logs, invoices for contracted services. Let's say you bring someone in to do seeding for you, or somebody who comes in and applies your fertilizers. You want to keep records of those things. And also if they clean out which they should clean out their equipment before they come on your farm. Recommendations from farm advisors, reports from analysis, cultivation, weeding, planting dates, things like that. And if you make your own compost, or if you apply manure, if it's a raw animal manure, you want to make sure that you apply it within there's pre-harvest intervals that are required, 90 days or 120 days, which you can get more into if you read the regulation, but you just want to keep records of all those things. Next slide. Specific records for seeds. I don't need to read all of this to you. It's basically invoices for what you purchase, verification or documentation that the seed is organic, meaning the supplier certificate. If you're going to use annual seedlings, those need to be certified. There is no exemption unless there's a temporary variance. And those come right from the USDA. If you're going to use non-organic, you need to look for organic and document that you looked for organic. That's called a commercial availability search, and that's directly described and explained in both that record keeping the instruction that I mentioned earlier, and also in 204 itself, which is the part of the regulation that talks about seeds. And again, if your seed's not organic, or even if it is certified organic, if it's coated, the coatings or the treatments need to be compliant with organic regulations. And if folks produce their own seeds, you want to keep records of the harvest and production and the amount of seeds so that balances during audit. Next slide. There is a specific requirement for crop rotation in the regulation. You can't keep growing the same exact crop back to back. So to rotate crops, this is the standard, this is the requirements of why crop rotation is required. It's to maintain or improve that soil. It helps provide management of pests and diseases, and it manages deficient or excess nutrients, and also controls erosion. So you'd want to keep records of your activity, meaning like which crops you've planted and when, and allow the inspector to verify the rotation of crops. Next slide, please. Crop, pest, weed, and disease management. This is where some folks get in trouble sometimes because need to use a product sometimes. Maybe your sanitation measures or your cultivation is not enough to prevent a disease or a pest from coming in. And we all know we don't want to have crop failure. We don't want to lose our entire crop to a disease or a pest. And so we need to use something, and we go out and we grab something and it ends up being not allowed. So definitely this is why communicating with your certifier is super important. This is why the service that WSDA provides is so crucial, because they do that review of those materials, those brand name materials. They have that background information, and with OMRI as well, the Organic Materials Review Institute. But crucially, it's call your certifier, communicate with your certifier. In this day and age, you can be in your farm supply store and shoot a text or call your certifier and like send them a picture of the thing you want to buy while you're in the store. So don't make those mistakes where you buy something and use it before you make sure that it's compliant. Next slide, please. This is pretty rare. This is the wild crop harvesting practice standard. Not very many people actually do qualify for wild crop Certification, generally the difference between crop production and wild crop harvesting has to do with management. If you're managing that crop at all, it's probably not going to qualify for wild crop collection. But if it does, the crucial bits there are that that area needs to, like a crop field, be free of prohibited substances for a minimum of 3 years before you harvest that wild crop. And the practice standard is that your harvesting or gathering or tapping of those trees, however you collect that wild product, cannot be destructive to the environment, and in fact will sustain the growth and production of that wild crop into the future. So that's about all I have. I think you can go to your next slide. Oh no, I have a couple more. I mentioned earlier communicating with your certifier. Please skip to the next slide. So after inspection, what happens is that inspection report goes back to the certifier, and on the first year, a different person than the person who did the initial review of your documents is going to do that decision-making process. They're going to do that compliance verification. They may communicate with you about inspection issues, clarify some of the findings that the inspector reported. And if there are no concerns, bam, you get your certificate and you're good to go. Sometimes that happens with just a reminder or two, which we also call conditions for continuing certification. Maybe by the next year, you need to have better records for something, or you had a boundary that was maybe a little sketchy and could possibly pose a risk. We wanted to see the next year that you increased your buffer or something like that. Those are examples of issues that might just be issued as a reminder or a condition for continuing certification instead of holding up certification that first year. Most often, new applicants do have some kind of communication with a certifier that's required for clarification or updated information before you can get your certificate. And then there are sometimes non-compliances too. If it's a formal non-compliance, you'll have at least 3 weeks to a month to respond, which means rebutting or corrective action, resolving that issue. And then once that's successful, you are issued a certificate. Denial is an option. It's rare. Sometimes denial happens for a portion of the operation. Let's say you've applied with 5 separate fields and one of them somehow didn't qualify. You could have a denial for that portion of the operation and get certified for the other 4 fields. Suspension and revocation are only for folks who are continuing certification. You can't be suspended until you're certified. That next slide, please. So Brenda also covered this pretty well, but part of the ongoing communications with the certifier is actually required in the regulation. Your certifier should be your first line of support for remaining in compliance and for protecting your certification status. You know, it's communication, transparency, keeping that relationship good. The sections of the regulation that apply to this are 205-400B and 406A, which require the annual update. And 205-400F2 requires that you immediately notify your certifier if there's any change in your operation that affects compliance. So that first bullet point there talks about the routine annual update. And in that update, you will notify your certifier of any changes to your system that you already made or that you intend in the coming year. And then in the middle of the cycle, let's say you got certified and 6 months have gone by and you're making a change, you're planting a new crop, or you're hiring somebody to come in and do something, you want to contact your client, your certifier, and let them know the modifications or additions, or maybe a new fertilizer, something like that. And then again, any time of the year, clarification of the standards, verification of an input, anything like that, contact your certifier. We are here to help you. We're here to help you understand. Education is kind of the fun part of our job. The compliance part is why it's a job. The education part is what makes it, I don't know, fulfilling. So yeah, so I think that's it for me. Next slide is, yeah, it's just, you know, different resources. I know that Viva Farms has a whole list of things they're going to provide afterwards, and Brenda has offered, and you know, I can offer for Oregon Tilth as well, and then we have question and answers.
I think I have one quick question from the audience. Thank you, Brenda and others for answering the others as the chat goes along. And Tyler's asking about with OTCO certification specifically, or maybe Viva's group grower program, that it's often a months-long process to get approved to apply one OMRI certified feather meal instead of a previously approved OMRI certified feather meal, or getting NOP compliant pellet seeds approval. I'm curious where that delay might come from.
Well, if something is approved by OMRI, or if it's a pelleted seed that is bought from a certified organic purveyor, supplier, it should not take months. If it is taking months, there's either a capacity issue, maybe your representative at Oregon Tilth might be too busy to address it right away. That is probably a situation specific thing that you should reach out to your Oregon Tilth people, or send a question in to myself if you want, and I can see if I can figure that out, because that doesn't sound normal.
No, and I'll just echo that. Yeah, I think certifiers on a general have a general understanding that we understand that this is your tool. You need this tool to move forward. And so, you know, for example, at WSDA, updates to input materials, we process within a 24-hour time period because, and it all is going to depend on if we have the right information. If we have all the information, then you can move forward. So like Sarah said, I think this is a, kind of a unique situation that definitely you should follow up on, because in general, that's not how things happen. And could we, do you guys have the ability to put that, the online resources that we put together?
Yes, no, yes.
Yeah, okay. So we did put together just a really quick little one-pager on some of the resources that have been brought up today and that we can kind of direct you to online. Kept it to a one-page, and so there's some links for USDA National Organic Program, which within each of those pages is a whole bunch of more resources. And so, you know, spend some time clicking on those links and seeing what all is there. I did not list out everything. And then the same thing for Oregon Tilth and WSDA. We have just a few kind of overarching links, but you go to those links and it's going to open up a whole library of resources and information that's there to support you. In addition, we have a link on how to find approved input materials, both a link directly to WSDA's list and then OMRI, OMRI's list. And these are used, you know, regardless of certifier. Those lists are available to you. And then the final little section in this resource that we put together is how to access that Northwest top web page, which you can go there to find a mentor, which is a really, you know, one of the first projects that got up and running under this top umbrella, was to put together a mentorship program. And so you can go on there and request a mentor, or you can request, you know, to be a mentor. It is a paid position, like it's something that you can get reimbursed for and compensated for. So if you're an organic farmer and you're willing to share your knowledge with a transitioning farm, it's a great opportunity.
Great. Well, we have a few more minutes for any questions anyone has. I'm not sure, Micah, if there's anything else pending from the chat. Sounds like a lot. Yeah, I know John's been able to kind of answer a lot of questions in the chat itself. But if anyone, yeah, we just have a few more minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to put a link in the chat that is to the evaluation for tonight's workshop. So if you're at a computer or you have the ability to click on that link, it just takes a couple minutes to fill out, and it's really helpful for us to help evaluate how the workshop went from your perspective. So we really appreciate if you could click on that link and do so. And yeah, there's a couple of new questions that have come in since putting that up, which is, are there already mentors signed up for Washington? And a couple questions around mentoring. Are there already mentors signed up in Washington? And how would someone, what's the link for connecting with that opportunity?
Yeah, so that link you can find in, it looks like Micah put a link both of our Spanish version as well as the English version of those resources. And it's there at the bottom of the page. And there somebody just got in the direct link for our Northwest top page. Thanks, Franklin. And yeah, there are mentors already kind of in the queue for Washington. Oregon Tilth has been working really closely with WSDA to help identify mentors here in the state so that you can access somebody that's close by. But it may be somebody, you know, not in Washington and in the Northwest in general. They're doing a really good job of trying to match up similar cropping systems, similar types of operations. And so the first step is just to reach out to that link and provide, you know, outline what it is that you're in need of. And the good folks at Oregon Tilth's top program are gonna do some work to make sure that they can find somebody to match you up with.
And I would just like to piggyback on that and just say, please sign up, because like this program is made for you guys, and they really, really are looking for people to provide mentorship to. There are a lot of mentors that are signed up and that are eager to do that. So just put your information in there and we will have people reaching out to you directly and personally to link you up there. So it's a really great opportunity.
Great. Well, yeah, I wonder, yeah, we're getting close to time here. So I definitely want to say thank you so much. Brenda Book from WSDA Organic Program, Sarah Townsend from Oregon Tilth, John Caputo, Oregon Tilth, Franklin Smith from Oregon Tilth. Thank you all for being here tonight. And of course, for all the work that you do in this space to help support farmers and keep this whole thing chugging along. Yeah, I know we just have a couple more minutes. Yeah, please do fill out the evaluation. If anyone has any last minute questions that they'd like to put up in the chat, feel free to do so. And otherwise, I have a question. So which is actually really, really nitty gritty, but I know that John mentioned that if OMRI or WSDA approved input material, you do not need prior approval. You do still need to list it with your certifier, but you can go ahead and use it, right? That's my understanding prior to getting approval.
I can confirm that. I didn't want to say it because it does also contain some risk, right? So if you're a new applicant and you're confident that you're using it within any restrictions or annotations as listed on the WSDA list or the OMRI list, you can go ahead and use that for Oregon Tilth. When the inspector shows up, if there are a few new materials to add, that's what I meant about updates. They can collect those updates, and as long as you're using it in a compliant manner, you're fine. Same thing with a pelleted seed that you got from High Mowing or one of those certified seed suppliers that has a compliant pellet on the seed. You'll be fine to go ahead and use that without pre-approval from your certifier. It just does take on some personal risk. And we try to pride ourselves on being available quickly and providing those fast turnarounds, but clearly that's not always the case.
Yeah, and I think Tyler's comment about the delay is more about Viva Farms' internal process. So just I'll own that. Yeah, so I guess just to clarify the sort of the restrictions, right? So even if something's OMRI certified, sometimes it's you can use this product, but you have to try mechanical or cultural means practices before using it. There's examples like that. And then the other one I would point out too is that, you know, if something has an OMRI label, their materials do get sunsetted, right? So if you have something that's been sitting in your greenhouse for a while, like it has an OMRI label on it, but it may not actually currently be OMRI allowed. So that's maybe a specific thing, but just if someone gives you some product that's got an OMRI label on it, it's old, like it's on you to verify, and that's all part of like that risk. I think that Sarah mentioned. But if you're buying something new to use and it has those labels, you can use those. You just want to familiarize yourself with those restrictions.
Yeah, one thing I would say though is the resources are there to cross-check. So just because it has an OMRI seal or a WSDA seal on the package doesn't necessarily mean it legitimately got reviewed, because people cheat. So go to the WSDA website, they provide that right online, and make sure that company name and that product name are exactly right, and go to OMRI and double check that. Because again, you don't want to take on that risk. You don't want to end up losing a whole field because you trusted some.
Mhm. Yeah.
And these material use issues are, in my 25 years of doing this, easily the #1 cause of people having problems with their certification. And consultants too, they just want to sell something or sell a service, and they're like, it's beyond organic. It's like, actually, yeah, because it's outside organic maybe. So
Yeah.
use caution with that. And another example, not just within the standards of like, make sure you're doing all those practices before you use this product, but some materials are allowed for certain purposes and not for others. And I like to use the example of hydrated lime. So hydrated lime is not allowed. It's totally prohibited for fertilization of crops, but it's completely allowed with records of why you need it for pest control in livestock. So it's allowed in one part of, so just because it's on OMRI doesn't mean it's allowed for every use. You want to make sure those annotations and restrictions fit what the purpose you want to put it to.
Those are all really, I echo everything Sarah said. Those are really good cautionary statements. And I just want to just add to that of use us as a resource. We are that cross check for you. I mentioned earlier, the one thing that is going to kick you out of certification and make you have to start all over again is the use of a input that's not allowed. So don't take on that risk. We work really hard to make sure that we do have that ability and are responding quickly to those particular questions, because again, we know that you need this as a tool. Inputs are the last resort. You have to have cultural, mechanical practices in place before you use any input. It's not a restriction on just a few, any input. And so there's also some things that could play into your organic system plan could suddenly get out of compliance based on using a material because it goes against what you've outlined you're going to do. And so that's why just work with your certifier. And if you're not getting quick response from either WSDA or OMRI, bring it up the chain, because this is something that we're all committed to. I think across the board is giving you those answers, being that resource for you. We don't want you to lose your certification over this type of thing.
May I ask really quick about tarping and occultation? Are there restrictions around that for organic use? So covering a plot or a portion of a plot with silage tarp for bed prep and weed suppression?
I could take this. Synthetic mulch material, plastic materials are allowed with restrictions. That restriction is it needs to be removed at the end of the growing season, or it needs to be removed before it starts to break down and cause little pieces to get stuck in your soil. Using it to kill weed seeds for solarization or occultation is absolutely permitted. Just put it into your organic system plan, make sure your certifier knows about it, and make sure you get that plastic out of the field before it starts to break down and disintegrate.
Great. And I will just point out, so we are a little over time, so I'm happy to stay on, and of course, welcome, anyone, please feel free to, but also please feel free to sign off if you need. I just want to point that out. And if you all are willing, there's, I think, at least one more question in the chat. So I'll just go ahead and read that. But I do want to say thank you so much for anyone who does have to take off. Thanks for being here. And hopefully we'll see you at a future workshop or around the valley, around the state. So yeah, Viva Farms is also a resource. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And there's a question, yes, Brenda posted, there's a fact sheet on mulches specifically about weed barriers, silage tarps, those sorts of things. And the last question was, are you able to speak to utilizing an OMRI certified biochar enhanced compost as related to this discussion? And I'm guessing if it's OMRI certified. Yeah, or Sarah?
Yeah, if it's OMRI certified, do you want to tell me the brand? I've got OMRI here, but if it's OMRI approved, it should be fine as long as you use it within any restrictions that are listed.
Just reach out to your certifier
Yeah,
and,
reach out to your-
talk to them about, you know, how you want to use it and what you want to use.
Great. All right. Well, a ton of material. Thank you all so much for packing so much into a short period of time. And there's a whole world of knowledge here. So definitely reach out. There's a whole slew of experts, certifiers that their whole their whole thing is to answer these types of questions. So hopefully we made some connections tonight. Good luck on your certification journey. And please let us know if we at Viva Farms can be of any help. And thanks again for being here. And an extra special thanks to our presenters for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eber. Thanks, Micah. Great job.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close it out. Thanks everyone so much.